How do I bring this capability to everybody in the world through technology? And it was like, wait a second, it's on their wrist and it's just data. What I learned in sports is data without actionable insight is completely useless.
Welcome to Forging the Future, and I'm here today with Dr. Erik Korem. I want to welcome Erik to the show.
Chris, thank you for having me here.
Erik has a PhD in exercise science and the experience to back it up. He's the founder and CEO of AIM7, a health tech company that turns your wearable data into personalized recommendations for your mind, body, and recovery. Erik, it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
Because I've got like 4 devices on right now. I think I'm your target client, right? So, and you're also a venture studio startup. So really happy to have this discussion here today. So you have a PhD in exercise science, but tell me a little bit more about your journey to choosing that career path. I mean, how did your interest in fitness and health develop?
It's a good question. I grew up in Dallas, and like a lot of kids in Texas, I grew up playing football. And I was a chubby
Friday Night Lights. You're a Friday Night Lights kid, huh?
That's right, Richardson, Texas. And I was overweight kid. I got picked on a lot growing up, and so when you're picked on a lot, you're always looking for ways to kind of just improve yourself. And so I got really interested in like how I could improve my body. And I even in like junior high and high school, I was paying to go to speed camps. I would mow lawns. And then like, this is like way before this stuff really was going on in the mid 90s.
Wait, what's a speed camp?
Yeah. Like,
what does that mean? What is it?
Doug Donnelly was a former Dallas Cowboy, was in the neighborhood, and he had like a speed, like teach kids how to run faster. So they'd go out to a track and we'd pay him like $100 for a couple of weeks. And I started buying books. Dr. Bob Ward, who was the first like performance coach in the NFL for the Cowboys. And so I just wanted to get better. I also fell in love with physiology, and I thought I wanted to be a surgeon. So I was a walk-on football player at Texas A&M, had offers to play like smaller college football, but the Aggies had just won the Big 12 championship. I got a call, and they're like, you can be a preferred walk-on. So I went to A&M as a biomedical science major, and we had one of the best strength coaches in college football. And I didn't really realize till later on, I mean, he was a huge name and a wonderful man. His name is Mike Clark. He's a mentor to the day. And we had a physiology lab attached to the weight room. This was very unique during the time. And Gatorade was actually doing a lot of their early RTD, ready to drink studies. So they would have us like drink this thing, push a sled. If you didn't throw up, it was good. And so I went to our strength coach. I was like, what's going on? He's like, Erik, there's a science to training athletes. And I was hooked. And so I would bug them all the time asking questions. And as soon as I graduated, I needed a practicum. And Coach Clark was like, here's a list of the universities where I have direct contacts. The first one was A for Arkansas. Picked up the phone. All I said was Mike Clark said, and they said, come on. And so I moved my rear end to Fayetteville, Arkansas, lived in somebody's basement, and that's where it started.
So what happened in Arkansas that kind of changed things for you?
Yeah, one day it was 2005, and it was after the Olympic Games, and a coach walked in, and he had some athletes with him. He's like, would you like to train them? And one of them was Veronica Campbell-Brown. She ended up in her career winning 8 Olympic medals, 3 golds. She's a Jamaican sprinter. And her husband, Omar Brown, and to this day, they're like family now. So I spent the next 14 years traveling the world with them. And I also worked with Tyson Gay the year he broke the 100-meter record. And what I noticed was around the world, they were training athletes in a totally different way. Because in America, we have a problem. We have too many good athletes. And so when you have too much of an abundant resource, you're not really concerned about how to develop it, right? But here's an interesting story. For instance, Australia in the 70s, they were ranked, I think, 60th in the world in medal count in the Olympics, like embarrassing. After the 78 Olympics, their prime minister got booed out of the Olympic Park. They went back and they're like, enough's enough. Now, have you been to Australia? Massive country, not a huge population. So what they did is they started what's called the Australian Institute of Sport. They brought technology, physiologists, biomechanists, psychologists, and coaches all under one roof. And over a period of roughly 20 years, they went from 58th or 60th in the world in medal count to number 3 by the Sydney Games. If you remember kind of during the Cold War, the Russians were investing a tremendous amount of money because it was political warfare. The Chinese are doing the same thing right now. They actually poach a lot of American coaches.
Seemed like though they took the chemical route. I don't know.
They do, but I won't go into that. But it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But they just took a more sophisticated route. And so my purview changed. And I was on a mission to bring a more sophisticated way of training athletes to the U.S. So that was kind of like I was on a path to do that.
So I know you spent some time overseas in Australia, of all places, the Australian football team, and you noticed the wearables they use. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in 2010, I was hired by Jimbo Fisher, who was the new head football coach at Florida State, and he had just taken over for a legend, Bobby Bowden. So the expectations were enormous. The guy's literally got a statue out in front of the stadium. There's a stained glass window with his face on. It's like a church to him.
Literally.
So after the 2010 season, Coach Fisher promoted me to director of football operations, which is essentially like the general manager. So I'm barely 30, $300 million football organization. But I had other career aspirations, but I felt like this is something I needed to do. So I was like, Coach, would you name me director of sports science as well? I was like, yeah, you can call yourself whatever you want. That job didn't exist. So during our vacation, I had gotten asked by a new startup franchise Aussie Rules football team. So imagine a new franchise NFL team. It's that big down there, 100,000 seat stadiums, $1 billion TV contracts, to come and do an information exchange. I went down there and I learned about the emerging world of sports science and athlete wearables. They were tracking athletes in games and using that data to adjust everything about training, how they were swapping out rotations. It was also happening in European soccer. I come back, I literally bring a case back of 12 of these tracking units, and there was no script for this. I'm duct taping them to the pads of our players. After the first week, the coach comes to me, Jimbo's like, what are we going to do with this? I'm like, I don't know. And that was not good. So I ended up hiring a former NASA propulsion engineer to help me derive meaning from this data. And once we were able to...
wait a second. Why a NASA propulsion engineer?
Well, they had just cut the space program.
Okay.
And his dad was a donor and called up to the school and said, hey, my son was an engineer for NASA. President Obama just cut the space program. Do you have a need? I'm like, yes. Okay. So we called him Rocket Man, and he literally was in a closet. And I was like, this is exactly what I need. It was raw telemetry. The UI was terrible. So he's like, perfect, I can do that. I mean, we have GPS data, we have accelerometers, gyroscopes, magnetometers.
I see. So this is a guy that is used to looking at streams of data and making sense out of it. And you're like, I've got all this data coming in. I need someone to kind of connect the dots.
Yes.
And you're my guy for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was like, I know what I'm looking for. I just don't have the time or the ability right now to do this. So when we were able to, we reverse engineered the game of football. Nobody had quantified. Think about this. Millions of dollars going into these games, hundreds of millions of dollars, and nobody had ever quantified the game. So they were just like throwing darts at a dartboard blindfolded. So once we were able to say, this is what the game is, this is how we're training our athletes, there was a major disconnect. Also, we were playing about the equivalent of 5 games a week before we got to Saturday, and our guys were just worn out. We had amazing coaches and a ridiculously loaded roster. We implemented a bunch of changes, kind of unified people around some things. We had an 88% reduction in injury the next year. And when the season, we won a championship, and then the NFL flew in. They're like, all right, what's going on? And it opened a multi-billion-dollar market for sports wearables. It went everywhere.
Well, in 2019, you were chosen to be a presidential leadership scholar. So tell me a little bit about that experience and how it influenced your work.
Yeah, so I was getting ready to defend my dissertation. And a buddy of mine, another Aggie, he's a Marine, got his master's at Harvard, MBA at Stanford, really smart guy. And he's like, Erik, you should do this presidential scholars program. I look at it, what it was online. I'm like, there's no way they're letting me in, and I don't have the time for it. He's like, you need to do this. So I submitted. It's 4 presidential centers, Clinton, LBJ, and the 2 Bushes. And they got together and they're like, hey, let's equip about 50 to 60 people a year with the resources that basically the White House would have. and train them on everything from leadership to negotiation and bring some civility back to politics. And so I got in, and it changed my life. I mean, everything about it. And for 7 months, I literally got trained by the former administrations. I ate dinner at next to the Declaration of Independence. They shut down the National Archives. I mean, it was things that you could never really ever have happen. And I'm just kind of, my world changes. And they paint a picture of like, hey, you can do more with your life and you can have a bigger impact. So I started thinking, how can I use my knowledge, skill, and abilities to help more people? I'm on a bus ride on the way back from the LBJ Ranch, and I'm sitting next to a guy named Mark Hadar. Everybody said that Mark's an entrepreneur. I didn't really. So I'm like, Mark, I got this idea. He's like, this is really good. He's like, how could you deliver this concept to anybody in the world with technology? I'm like, I'm an expert in wearables. He goes, go figure it out. So I started looking at wearable data. I'm like, got hundreds of millions. It's 130 million Americans now own a wearable, but they don't know how to use this data.
Or 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah, you got 4 of them. You got a CGM, a Fitbit, an Apple Watch. And so I'm like, okay, what do people want from their data? And so a buddy of mine from the University of Iowa, we sent out, I'm an academic, so we're like, let's collect data. The number one response we got was more energy. Then it was stress, sleep, and weight loss. Okay. Can we predict somebody's energy level with their wearable and some other unique data sets? And not only could we do that, we could predict their energy and mood state multiple days in advance. So we got these models externally validated because now that we know how it works, we're the world. I mean, we literally are some of the best experts in the world on what to do. So I brought this to Mark, and Mark's like, oh, you got something. And so he wrote me a check and was like, I want to be on your board. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but that was the beginning. So the Presidential Scholars Program, if it wasn't for that, this wouldn't have existed.
Interesting. Yeah, I like how the world conspires to make you open up your opportunities and mind of what you can have an impact for. I mean, I always feel like it's a little bit like the Matrix moment where a lot of people are like consuming what the world gives them, but then, you can actually change the world. And this is the concept that like, oh, well, I drink Coca-Cola, for example, but you can actually like work for Coca-Cola, right? And do things like work for Disney and be behind the scenes or change behavior, change people's lives and actually create that content. And then was this before or after you got your doctorate? Because you were doing your doctoral work on sleep and high performance athletes, right? High performance athletes. And that's something only scientists dream about. Okay, sorry, bad pun. But can you tell me a little bit more in depth about your findings and the importance of sleep? Because I'm actually, I get on average about 5 hours a night for like the last 5 years. Seems to be my rhythm. But I'm kind of curious because I used to say there's plenty of time to sleep when I'm dead, but maybe if I slept more that.
Yeah,
I could put that off later.
Yeah, you may die earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, it was interesting. I had an opportunity to work with all these amazing athletes and then dip my toe in some of the Department of Defense things. And I noticed that whether you were a world-class sprinter or football player or whatever, the best of the best could adapt to physical and psychological stress really fast. I bet you if you got with some of the best CEOs in the world, it's the same thing. And so I'm like, okay, how can we bring this capability to anybody in the world? At the time, it was athletes. How do I duplicate this? And we kind of coined this phrase, adaptive capacity. So I'm like, what are the drivers for this? Well, there's only so many things you can't live without: water, food, one of them sleep. So I'm like, I want to see how sleep impacts our brain's ability to adapt to stress. And without going into all the gory details, we literally were able to measure something called slow cortical potentials of the brain. It's like the millivolt of the brain, the battery of the brain. And we found that when athletes were in a specific millivolt range, they were more adaptable to mental and physical stress. And guess what? That duration of sleep perfectly lines up with the recommendations of 7 to 9 hours. And so we learned a whole lot about how sleep is like the unlock and the things that you need to be paying attention to regarding your sleep: duration, when you go to bed, the consistency of sleep. And even though I'm a wearable guy, the whole idea of like tracking REM and non-REM sleep, it's a complete waste of time because it's not even accurate yet. And you can't do anything to manipulate those anyways. So there's like certain levers you can pull to, get better sleep so that you can make better decisions. You have a better mood, physical and psychological performance is better. And most people that probably listen is like, I don't need very much sleep. I can almost promise you're not that person that has a genetic polymorphism where you can sleep less than 7 hours and be okay. You probably don't even know what good is.
So where did your entrepreneurial spirit come from? I mean, did you always want to be a founder? It doesn't sound like it.
No. Interestingly, both of my parents were entrepreneurs. And my dad is an author, started a publishing company. My mom owns a catering and food manufacturing company in Dallas. So when my dad started publishing books, guess what? All the kids are involved. I'm doing book jackets. He go on a speaking tour. I'm working the book table. My mom started her catering business out of a 400 square foot kitchen in Richardson, Texas. She now has over 50 employees. She's in Central Market. They white label her products. But every weekend I was working. Every summer I was working at the kitchen. And work ethic was something that was, my parents were very upfront, like with us as kids. Like if God gives you a talent or ability, you need to use it to your full extent. When I was 10 years old, I think my dad took me to the bank. I got a business loan and he made me buy lawn mowing. I wanted to mow lawns. So he's like, you're going to get a loan and you have to pay it back. So I've been doing this in some form or fashion. And I always had this, I haven't really talked about this before, but I always had this struggle internally working in sports because not that selfishly I wanted to be the leader, but I felt like, I'll just say it. Sometimes I felt like I could do it better. I felt like that the organization wasn't there and that the talent of the people weren't being leveraged. And the great organizations I was in, it was done the right way. The bad ones was pretty clear. And so I thought I'd seen enough. And when the AIM7 opportunity came by no means am I perfect. I'm a work in progress. But I was at Florida State. I'll tell you one thing. And this guy, he's very wealthy donor. He was actually an Auburn guy. And he came by, and a friend of mine who was a coach on the staff said, hey, I want you to give him a tour. So I'm giving him a tour. And about halfway through, he's like, hey, Erik, what do you want to do with your career? I was like, I'd love to be this, high performance role. He goes, it's too small. And I was offended. And I told my dad, and my dad's like, Erik, you just need to park that one and think about it. And, we don't have a massive company or anything, but I really do. The thing I enjoy the most is finding really talented people. I think about it like a football coach. And I've realized now, like in software, if you don't have amazing engineers, you're dead in the water. You got to have a quarterback, got to have a left tackle. You got to look at your roster and see where the holes are. And you got to go recruit and fill and then get them working together as a unit. And that is what I love. That. And I'm looking forward to the day I can start getting more and more a little bit out of it and more on it.
Well, I mean, they often equate, some founders think of their teams as family. I actually do like the team metaphor better. And you come from that background. I think you had the right idea because it is all
building
about
a championship roster.
Exactly. You've got a team, you got to recruit, you got to get, it's performance related. So how did you arrive at the idea for AIM7?
Yeah, it was that whole journey of like, doing the thing with the Australian rules football, bringing it to Florida State, and then the light bulb moment of, I can do something more. What's that going to be? How do I bring this capability to everybody in the world through technology? And it was like, wait a second, it's on their wrist and it's just data. And what I learned in sports is data without actionable insight is completely useless. And that's why you saw one of the reasons Fitbit lost billions in their valuation was because they never solved that problem. Now, granted, if we had a $2 billion valuation, you'd be pretty happy. All of our investors would be happy. But, and then what happened was Apple Watch came on the market and it could do the same thing and other amazing features. And people are screaming for just give me actionable recommendations. And we're like, you know what? We've been doing this for a decade. Mm-hmm. You talk about what's your advantage. It starts with that. We actually know how to do this. It's based on evidence-based practice, the scientific literature, and doing this. And so, in the AIM7, you're going to laugh. I wanted to get AIM.com.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I can't.
Hey, goals,
right? And this guy who was a brand marketing guy, he did like Facebook and Oakley, and he's like, what about AIM7? And I'm thinking about it. I'm like, awesome. We're aiming people in the right direction, and 7's like a number of completion. We're with you all the time. And so it just stuck.
Nice. Well, I know as a potential client, when you first interviewed me about, well, you know, what do I need from all my devices? That was exactly the point. It's like, well, I've got, like I said, 5 years of Fitbit data. I have my Oura Ring. I've got my, you know, X, Y, and Z different products, and they've got all this data, but I don't know what to do with it. You know, tell me what I need to do or what I need to change. Let me tell you what my goals are. You help me like accomplish those. Because right now I'm just looking at the screen and seeing like how long I slept and how many steps I took and, you know, whatever, right? So, and that's really what AIM7 aims to do, right? Is to aggregate all of that into something and give you more coaching based on what you're seeing.
100%. So we do that with mind, body, and recovery. So the three big things, we kind of do this from an acute and a long-term standpoint. Every day we can provide you with a precise type, intensity, and duration of exercise your body is ready to adapt to. From a 30,000 foot perspective, what we're teaching people how to do is to build that capacity to adapt to more physical and psychological stress. And there's 5 pillars to do that: sleep, exercise, mental fitness, nutrition, and healthy relationships. The scientific literature is very clear. Those things increase our resilience and longevity and health and lifespan. So what we do is we're like, okay, you like to do these things? Like to do the elliptical or a HIIT program or yoga. This is the one you should do today, this hard, this long. Then from a mental fitness perspective, it's like, oh, you're stressed? Use a specific breathwork tool. Oh, your mood's down? Use a specific gratitude intervention, because we know what those things do. And then from sleep, going back to our conversation, we look at like, is your duration off, timing off, consistency off, and then our algorithms nudge people into the right locations. And then from a chronic standpoint, a long-term perspective, after a week, we analyze your data and we're like, here's where you should start mind-body recovery. Because research demonstrates, there's a paper on the frontiers of physiology that showed these devices do not change long-term health outcomes.
Right.
It was done with Oura Rings. Very well conducted study. But what does, the devices are good to track, right? But you need a goal, you need real-time feedback, you need encouragement, and you need education. We'd already built our model, and this came out in 2022. All of that is in our app. And so how did we know? We pattern matched, and it was nice. The scientific literature validated it. So we built a really unique behavior design model with the former senior sports psychologist from the U.S. Olympics. We are rapidly expanding right now. We have some of the best in the world that you don't even know this. Dr. Alex Arbach, head of wellness development for the Raptors, just joined. Former head of sports nutrition for the New York Giants just joined, Pratik Patel. It is like exploding.
Why are they joining you? I mean, what are they excited about?
They see that we're skating to where the puck is going, and we have an advantage. We're hardware agnostic. We're data agnostic. So if you're a hardware company, it's really hard to do both. And we are building right now, and you've played a key role in this. There was some, we listen. We went about this very strategically.
You're coachable. Kudos for that.
Thank you. We fixed that in our onboarding process. We haven't heard a gripe about it yet.
Nice.
So in our onboarding process, we serve busy people, mid-career professionals, household CEOs, as we call them. They're time poor, they're busy, and they just want to know what to do. So we had this onboarding process where we walk people through this behavior design model, and these actions were stacking up. And Chris, you were like, man, it's like just stacking. We're like, oh, we need to create modules. And I haven't heard a word about it since we released that. But we're moving very quickly into some generative spaces. But the only way you can get there responsibly is you have to have a highly tuned recommendation engine. So we're coming out with some stuff that I think it's going to be a game changer.
And you're going to be layering on that AI as we go forward. I mean, of course, AI is hot for everything, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it does lend itself to that, right? Once you have that model and you have that data and you have that history and you're leveraging what you've learned from the performance athletics market and applying it to everyday people.
Absolutely. The heuristics remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of biologically, it's the same signals. This isn't like going from elite to average. There was just the premium to get there was so much higher in sports. And so a lot of the great things that have happened were behind closed doors. Mm. So we have these algorithms that we've been building over this long period of time with the recommendations of we know what levers change different outcomes. So with the AI, it's like, I don't really want to talk about what we're doing because it's going to happen soon. But if you don't have a highly tuned recommendation engine, you cannot responsibly use these large language models. They'll go off the rails and they could hurt somebody. Mm-hmm. So we're using the large language models to process certain things quickly. We dump them in our back end. Then we use our algorithms to adjust. And so we can do some stuff that's get people are going to flip out.
Oh, that sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your experience of running a startup here in Houston.
Yeah, I moved back to Houston. So I was the director of sports science for the Texans. When I decided to start AIM7, we were in Virginia. And we're like, if we're going to do something really hard, we want to go back to where we had a really good community. We have a great church here, and we loved Houston. And I didn't really think about it from a tech community standpoint. I was like, I didn't care where it was. I mean, Warren Buffett's in Nebraska, right? It doesn't matter, especially today with technology. So we moved back here in the pandemic. Let's call it 2021. And I noticed that I was like, oh my gosh, we're in one of the most diverse cities in America, if not the most diverse. And all these people were starting to flood into Texas for tech. I'm like, this is the perfect place for this. You have great incentives to build a company in Texas. Even during economic downturns, we're still forging ahead. You're sending out stuff on our Slack channel like, hey, there's a lot of investing going on in Texas. We're not slowing down. And so to me, it's like, why, like we have the best medical center in the world, but what we're doing is medicine 3.0. It's the preventative side. So why can't we build the preeminent health and wellness company here in Houston? Like that would be something that fits right into the ecosystem and we can all be very proud of. And so I'm very bullish on doing it right here.
So Erik, you just went through our venture studio, and what did you learn?
Yeah, I think the biggest take home for me is as an early stage company, as a founder, is like you can't be around enough good operators. And that was the reason I joined. It was because of you, because of Dave Matthews, because of all these other great operators. It was like, I want to learn from people that have actually done it. Look, we'll take venture capital for sure. Some of those people, that's what they do is evaluate. But what's really important is like, how do you build the thing? And you need to have those people that you can go ask those hard questions to and be like, hey, look, maybe I didn't handle that, but I can pattern match with this. And we had so many great conversations along the cohort, whether it was double Buckies in one day, whether it was the most exhausting pitch week of my entire life. And a lot of great stuff has come out of that. You guys exposed us to a lot of players here in the state of Texas. So you put on a great event. That was the number one thing, was me being able to, my team being able to be around experienced operators who have built successful companies, who have done the thing, and then having them, like Robert Campbell, go look at our business model and rip me apart for 2 hours and then be like, you did okay, but here's what you need to fix. And then him taking a Saturday morning at 8:00 for 2.5 hours to come back and spend time. Mm. And then, those things you can't pay. I mean, you can't pay for that.
It's interesting too, because we're doing interviews right now for cohort number 6, right? Mm. And we have startup founders and they're 23 years old and they're fresh out of, their MBA at Rice or somewhere else. And they're like, we just need the money, right?
You need some of this.
Yeah, right.
And you need to realize.
They're like, well, I don't see, we don't really need the studio. Can you just give us a check? And, we have the tech covered. And I'm like, well, how many companies have you founded so far? And they're like, is this your first one? Yeah, I'm okay. I guess you just don't know what you don't know yet, right?
It's
what would you say to those founders?
I would say humble pie. Mm. Look, you need to be confident. If you're not confident, then get out of the game. But there's something about humility, and in football, it was like, and I think this is one of the things that prepared me for this job. You are judged every Saturday. Every time I send an investment newsletter to the people that write checks, I feel like it's game day. And it's not always going to be a high. I didn't mean to get emotional, but when people write a check, that's somebody's money. And I think it's just arrogance, and it's just being young. But there's a reason why most successful entrepreneurs are in their early 40s. I've got some gray on my beard. And look, if this thing fails, we're going to go down fighting. But I don't believe that's going to happen. We're impacting lives. I mean, the emails that we get from people like, I'm a more present mom. I'm sleeping more. I have more energy. 84% of people that use our app are converting. 80% are staying after a month. And right now, our March cohort, we have 68% 90-day retention rate. That would put us in the top 10% in the App Store. And we're not even close, Chris, to where we're going to be.
That's fantastic.
I believe we're building something that's going to define an industry. And it's not because we're proud and thumping our chest. It's because we spend so much time talking to our customers. And I'm obsessed with that, because if we build that thing that they love and we can solve problems for them, guess what? Everybody, we're going to grow.
Well, I believe you are, and you will. I think you're making a real impact, and I think that there's going to be a lot of benefit out of this technology, and I can't wait to use it for myself. I want to stick around a few more decades myself, so I'll probably change my sleep habits or something. But appreciate you sharing that, Erik.
You got it.
And that's really what entrepreneurship is all about: is impact. And it's not just about the money. Right? Well, I'm wearing my caffeine molecule socks today. I know you did a podcast or two about the benefits of caffeine, so I was happy to hear that, since I do drink 2 or 3 cups of coffee. I do have some socks for you, because I noticed you don't have any.
Oh, my goodness.
You're not wearing any, but it's a rocket sock.
Oh, I love this. Thank you so much.
There you go. Well, if you wear them, or when you when you need to dress up or something, Well, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.